Alright, after this one, we just have one more left, so let's go into episode 10 of Season 4 of Fargo, which is doing its job as the next to last episode of pushing us in a direction. We were talking about how there's always a chance that some of the craziest shit might happen the episode before the finale rather than the finale itself. And yeah, first off, of course, we're cutting down the cast list, it seems. And they made a decision here that I can see people maybe possibly hating, but I actually kind of like it. And that is sort of we were left with the whole thing of the Fada's mother was killed in the shootout with Mark Elron, and that was the big setup to, oh, they're gonna have some really anger retaliation, and this is gonna get there's gonna be blood flying everywhere, and everything is gonna be anger based because you've got the Lloyd and everybody thinking Satchel was killed, and then you've got their mother dying, and just all this personal anger and hatred is coming forward, and we just kind of skip over it and kind of fast forward through this and kind of get to the more key point in the war where this is fast forwarded through by showing us this really nice old fashioned sort of montage where we're seeing like the newspaper headlines and stuff like that, and there's the really great sort of dissolves from one thing to the next where we see like bodies at crime scenes, and then it dissolves into them in their picture in the paper, and then that dissolves into them in the slab in the morgue in the funeral home. And the fact that this is pretty much how they're gonna pay the Ethelreda's family is gonna pay off their debt to Lloyd, basically. And I think the main reason that I don't mind that we're kind of fast forwarding in time is that everything we just talked about like the reactions to the deaths or supposed deaths that have happened up to this point, and the fact that we really, like, if we were to see, a scene of Josto and Katana saying, we're going to get revenge for our mother's death and stuff like that, obviously it'd be, a good acting showcase, but as far as, like, the story progressing, it's really something that we can imagine without necessarily having to see it. Like, we know what that would look like, so there wouldn't really be anything new brought to the table if we saw those particular scenes. So to just kind of imagine, like seeing it from the perspective of if we didn't have episode 9 where it is in the chronology in which we saw it, but if it was like you put episodes 10 and 8 together, and it's like you see that they discover that their mom was killed in the crossfire, and then it just immediately cuts to, and then there was carnage over a period of time. It's like I think that gets the point across. If you imagine those kind of one immediately following the other as far as the visual that we see as an audience. So I didn't mind if we didn't get too into the details of how much that progressed them coming from like a personal vendetta in places, because we pretty much get the point. I think, and we've seen enough stuff in this genre that we've seen the personal vendetta done so many times. It's ingrained in our minds, and we know. So to just kind of skip to where we need to be was probably the better call. Even though, like I said, it would have been probably a good acting showcase, but I'm okay with it. So we do get talking about retaliation and consequences or whatever. We are introduced to the character Happy, which the episode itself is named after, and this is a plan of, like, I guess, payback to Loy for when he went off on Leon recently. And what's interesting about this is that it kind of sets up that whole thing of, even though this, at least in this episode, didn't directly, like, guess to something bad happening to Loy personally, it does kind of set up that idea of, especially when you're in this world, that's another thing where if you've seen enough stuff in this genre, this is just common ground at that point. The idea that you do so much bad shit and you react in like a rash way so many times, and there's so much blood on your hands and all these interactions that you've had and all these people that you've cut down. You're never, when you're somebody in Loy's position, you're never quite sure what the one thing is of all those things that's gonna come back to bite you in like fatally. And this was a case where you kind of get that same sense, but it's kind of it's I would say it's slowly working its way. But if I remember correctly, we only just met Happy, so it does feel a bit accelerated. But I guess we kind of are at the time of acceleration. Though even if I do think that there is maybe we're going a bit too fast here, which is really interesting since I was talking in the first video about how I've always thought that as great as this show is as a whole, like all the seasons, I always felt like 10 episodes was a bit much. Like there was usually a filler episode and it could be cut down to 8 for each season, but this one has one extra one in 11, and I feel like we're moving a little fast when we get here. You could probably argue there were some things that were focused on that necessarily weren't necessarily as important as other things, and that's how we managed to get to this point to where we're at the next to last episode and it feels like it's kind of moving along a little too fast. Sort of like the entire last season of Boardwalk Empire, how it's like the entire last season of Boardwalk Empire was practically on fast forward. um, but I don't think it's necessarily to that degree. But because there's still plenty of stuff here that's sort of falling into place, and it even is still seemingly kind of moving relatively, like, well-paced enough, deliberately paced enough, that it seems to be setting up for something big that we'll see in the last episode. But there is also some stuff that you would think would go a little further given the developments we've gotten to now, that are cut off in this episode, like the camaraderie now of Josto and Gaetano. And of course I had that theory a while back that Gaetano would die by the hand of Josto, thus giving Josto the highest, power, and put him in that highest place of power, showing what he's capable of. But, no, once again, just the total opposite of where I was going. Where it actually became sincere, because I was questioning in the last video how he felt about Loy letting him go and how that was affecting what he was doing. Because it was like, was he, being friendly with Josto just to, stick it to Loy and do the opposite of what he was expecting, or was it genuine? And by all accounts from this episode, everything that Gaetano and Josto did together and all the brotherly love was there genuinely and sincerely. And there's even that moment that's quite funny after he has the confrontation with his future father-in-law, and they kind of roughhouse a little bit after Gaetano punches the guy out, and Josto goes to lift him and he can't do it, and just the way Gaetano says, like, it's okay, like, just it's this really comedic moment, but it's also such like a brotherly moment, and it's crazy how after everything that went down, that they suddenly that brotherly love between them is so easy to like digest, and like it works without feeling too off and forced or sudden even. But of course, once again, as I said about Atun, and then again about Deathbeat, is the whole thing of if it seems like we're getting a lot more of a character than we usually do, that usually means that they're on their last legs. So we do get this whole sort of middle portion of the episode that confirms to us, number one, apparently Zelmera is not going to go after Otis, assuming she comes back at some point, looking for revenge, because she was beaten to it. So that theory is out the window. But that's another thing, though, that I think I mentioned in the last video, was it seemed too easy. Like, it seemed too obvious of a direction for her getting away, but it felt like the only way it could go, so I don't know. And I can't imagine they're just going to leave her as a loose end, so I don't know what the hell she's going to do should she come back. But going into this moment now where it's Otis's last moments, and it's nice to see where the character's at here, and like that he finally is like, because he's a character that's always been so on edge, not just his OCD, but just kind of a seemingly like an inherent fear that was like constantly in him. But the thing here also is that when he goes into his apartment and sees that they've already been here, it's kind of has like that tilted look to it, and it's like it feels like it's an interesting look almost inside his head, especially in this particular moment, when everything's just kind of closing in on him. And then a very I guess you could say, Coen Brothers moment happens here. When it's set up like a really, really big moment, and a weirdly kind of an emotional payoff. When we see Otis killed after he's pretty much come to terms with that, and it's because obviously we revisit the death of his girlfriend that was talked about before while he was in the war, and how there's kind of almost like one of those we'll meet again kind of things where he was like, oh, after having to confront the fact that her picture had been desecrated, it was he's pretty much at a point now to where it's whatever's going to happen to him right now is fine, because he's trapped, and he might as well just hope to possibly go wherever she is. And then just as this big emotional payoff happens, Gaetano's very abrupt death happens, which I would think you immediately, if you think Coen Brothers, you immediately think of the scene in Intolerable Cruelty when what was his name? It was Erwin Keyes' character, and when he accidentally switched out his inhaler with his gun. But the thing I actually think of when I think of the way Gaetano died is Out of Sight. Either way, it's wherever there's Clooney breaking into a house, there's accidental shootings in the head of like the more burly characters. But regardless of that, it is Schwartzman does have that perfect reaction. That what the fuck is just perfectly delivered, because it's like so this is how this ends. It's like it's almost the way Josto says what the fuck is basically like it's shocking in the moment, but like, yeah, of course that would happen. Of course it would happen now, especially since Gaetano was showing, like with the father-in-law, that he was pretty much more than willing to be his protector. And it's like now Josto's best and most temporary as it was loyal protector is done now. Especially now that Loy, who's been losing, is now about to potentially get an upper hand. But before we get to that point, we'll talk about what's going on with Jesse Buckley's character, and it's a scene that I've kind of been waiting for. That's really like interesting to see. It's interesting to see her finally come unglued to Ethelreda personally, where it's like, because the whole time up to this point, there's been that sort of weird politeness, like so polite, it's just bizarre. Even when she's like talking down to her, she's still doing it in that Minnesota nice accent and stuff like that. And so to actually just finally see her just like try to get in her face practically, it's like almost jarring in a sense that there was no sort of the cordialness in between. Like there's no separating, there's no like pretending there's not something going on here. I do think it's a little inconsistent with the time jump, so that might be kind of weird, because I'm not entirely sure how much time went by in the newspaper montage, but it feels like enough that like she would have acted by now, and the fact that she goes in to potentially kill Ethelreda finally, but then an interesting turn of events seems to happen. Where the supposed sort of Grim Reaper-like figure, we get a backstory on, finally. The whole idea that he is the ghost of a slave ship owner that Ethelreda's ancestors, one of them, has killed. And so he's basically cursed them and is haunting them. But the interesting thing about this is, so far up to this point, he has signaled death, I guess, because he hangs out in the funeral home, of course. Because I was questioning, like, why is he always around Ethelreda? And it's like, she lives in a funeral home, of course. But it seems like there's something more specific than that. But then he was hanging around Swanee when we saw him that second time. In the first episode we saw him, I think. And then later on, they saw him in the train station right before everybody got taken out. Nearly everybody got taken out. And now he has prevented death by scaring off Jesse Buckley, which is interesting. I can't tell if it's a case of... I was throwing a few things around, like, if maybe he only signifies death to, like, the evil. Like, because... Like, when he was hanging around... We saw him hanging around Swanee when she was still sick after the pie. And it's like... And, of course, after she, with Zelmare, committed this horrible act that caused all these deaths in the train station, and the fact that he was there is when she eventually died. But I don't know, but that's just something. But then there's also the idea of there, like, if it's not, like, it wasn't Ethelrita's time, but then the question is are we going to see Ethelrita's time? I don't know. Or is it going to be, or is he now a bad omen for Jesse Buckley? I have no idea. Or is it only family members? Because it's like a family curse, but it's like Swanee wasn't family, but she was connected to family by being the lover of Zelmair, so I really don't know. Zelmair's not even still in this episode yet, so it's hard to tell where all of this is going to go, but I really just don't have many guesses at this point, which is a good place to be this late in the game. So before we get to the last scene, one more thing about Jessie Buckley is the fact that she's now been arrested for the attempted murder of Dr. Harvard and potentially all the others. Right now, I think they're only going on what Harvard has said. But I am curious if Josto is going to get involved in this because of his apparent love for her that hasn't come back since that moment they talked, but they haven't really had a scene together since then that I can remember. But if that's the case, what that's going to do, and Josto potentially reuniting with Dr. Harvard will be very interesting to see. So I feel like there's so many places this can go, but it kind of keeps taking those different angles, and sometimes they might be a bit unsatisfying. Like it would have been nice if Otis was maybe more, like, in the long run, if Otis was a little more utilized. So some of these turns that are kind of happening sooner than you expect or not in ways you expect, I could see kind of being underwhelming with all the build-up they've had. But at the same time, I'm consistently wrong about where I think it's going for the most part. So I have no idea. And so I guess that also takes us to the end, where we have Loy, who's kind of at this, almost seems like a stopping point. Like he's at the end of his run, and he seems like really aware of it. Like he even kind of jokes that for all he knows, he could have a half an hour to live, with all the stuff that's going on. He's like reminiscing about Satchel's birth and stuff like that. And he's losing the war, or he thinks he's losing the war, and it seems like he's pretty much done at this point until Ethelrita walks through his door with this information about Jessie Buckley and the ring. And of course, it kind of feels like we're coming back full circle now, where it was like Ethelrita kind of seemed like our center and kind of our star at the start of it in the first episode or two, and then she just kind of drifted off as a side character and would occasionally pop up, and now it's kind of all coming back together, and especially the way her and Buckley's sort of rivalry, if you want to call it that, is working its way into everything. So everything is starting to connect and come together. The thing I'm not quite figuring out right now is how that information is going to be used. Knowing like how Donatello was killed, but because there's so much that Ethelrita doesn't know. So I don't know, because it's like, I don't think, if I remember correctly, I don't remember a time where she would know the connection between her and Josto. So I have no idea. So that's the beauty of going into this. Just everything feels up in the air at this point. I said anything could happen. There's possibilities it could be underwhelming. There's possibilities it could be amazing. So I will hold out hope that we tie up everything nicely and see what happens. And lastly, Satchel does make an appearance in this episode. Given that it's more than likely headed in the direction I would imagine with Satchel, it's pretty chilling to see him kind of at his turning point, where the way we see him interact with the dudes in the truck, and it's like knowing who he more than likely, like really more than likely becomes, is going to be very interesting. This is going to make me, like, Satchel's storyline alone, I feel like is going to want to make me want to revisit Season 2 as soon as possible. Because it's the one I kind of have the least recollection of. So we'll see where this takes us, and I guess we will pick this up again when we're finishing this. So until then, I think